Hey everybody, welcome to a video on markets, and more specifically, what is a market-based economy? Guys, this video is not pro-market, it is not anti-market. This video is just going to focus on the pros of markets and the cons of markets, because there are both. Guys, understand that markets are controversial, and we know this, guys. When we talk to people out there about markets, we generally get one of two reactions. One group, they kind of light up and they say, oh, I'm pro-market, I believe in markets, and they're just very positive about markets. The other group, they kind of bristle, right? They say, oh, wow, markets, that's the reason for income inequality or gender inequality, racial inequality, ethnic inequality, environmental degradation. And here's the thing, both sides have kind of good reason to feel the way they do, because like we said, there's pros to markets and there's cons to markets. But here's the deal. We, as a society, in just about every developed country, have decided to go with markets as our way for deciding some very basic economic questions. What are those basic economic questions? What are we going to produce? Who is going to produce it? How is it going to be produced? How much will be produced? And who is going to get it? Now here's the thing, guys. When it comes to markets, it's not a binary choice. It's not, oh, we can go with markets or we can go with the government to answer these decisions. Instead, what we can have is what's called a mixed economy, a situation where we have a market-based economy, but we have a significant amount of intervention in the markets because, again, of some of those cons of markets. So it's kind of like, as a society, we recognize that in general, markets have these really good, positive forces that, really bring about some positive results. But at the same time, we've got to intervene with markets because there's some serious negative results of markets that we can get. Now, before we go any further, let's just talk about, in general, what is a market? And to understand what a market is, I've got a basic supply and demand diagram, right? I've got supply and I've got demand. Now, it's important to understand that supply, that curve, is based on the marginal private cost of supplying a good. And demand, that curve, is based on the marginal private benefit of getting that good or consuming that good. So we've got a supply curve and a demand curve. Horizontally, we're measuring quantity, specifically the quantity supply, quantity demanded, and quantity equilibrium. So we're measuring quantity supply, quantity demand, and quantity equilibrium on the horizontal axis, or horizontally. On the vertical axis is this thing known as price, which is our price mechanism. Okay, now of course we know what price is, but what's known as our price mechanism, and what economists mean when we talk about the price mechanism, is it's the thing that's going to coordinate the action of suppliers and demanders so that we get a result that the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. In other words, we should not get a situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, a surplus, long term, or the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, a shortage, long term. Now, why is that? Well, if we take a really quick look at this diagram, you see if we have a price way up here, right, a really high price, we're going to get a quantity supplied, horizontal distance, right, quantity supplied, greater than the quantity demanded, which is a surplus, and that's going to put downward pressure on prices. And as the price goes down, the quantity demanded is going to increase. Think that we're moving right? We're going to increase the quantity demanded, and the quantity supplied is going to decrease, right? And if a price is too low, we'll get a situation, the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. Shortage, right? And those shortages is going to cause the price to go up, and when that price goes up, the quantity supplied is going to increase. I'm moving to the right, and the quantity demanded is going to decrease. So, markets, what are they? They're places where decentralized suppliers acting in their own private interests come together with decentralized demanders acting in their own private interests, and their actions are being coordinated by prices. Now, when I say that what a market is, when I give that definition of a market, again, a place where decentralized suppliers acting in their own private interests and decentralized demanders acting in their own private interests are being coordinated by prices, we get two different reactions from different groups of people, right? Some go, oh, that sounds fantastic. I love that they're decentralized. I love that they get to act in their own self-interest. And I love that we've got this thing that's called price, where we don't have the government deciding the stuff. We just allow price, this mechanism of price, to coordinate regulate their actions. No government or central planning needed. Yet the other side, right, they go, ooh, I see all kinds of problems with all this decentralized action by private interested people or people only focused on their own self-interest. And we've got this price mechanism that could give us results that we don't like, right? So again, we can see, okay, I understand there could be some positives to this, but some negatives to this, and how people take different impressions away when they hear about markets or talk about markets or think about markets. Now here's the deal. Markets, right? They're our tool for answering some of our basic economic questions. We now have an understanding of what a market is. Now let's see what we think of using this tool known as markets to answering these questions. The first one is, what are we going to produce? What are we going to produce? Now, I have to say, this one is generally associated by a lot of people with the positives of markets. If we didn't have markets, people that are decentralized, acting in their own private interest, we might not have near the variety of goods and services that we have. We have such variety and we have such innovation that has taken place that if we didn't have markets kind of at the core of our economic system, we might not have near the products that we have or the different variety of the products that we have. Next, who is going to produce it? This also is generally going to be a positive of markets because it's going to lead to a lot of efficiency. But I have to say, we have to ensure competition, which gets me to another point about markets. Markets, when we talk about markets, when economists talk about markets, it's not this binary choice of going with markets for answering these questions or maybe going with something like central planned societies, a situation where the government decides these questions. What we can have is a situation is kind of a mixed economy where we can have markets at the base, but we can have intervention. And on this competition one, that's our first place where we might want to intervene. We might want to make it so that the suppliers don't aggregate together, right? That they don't, form a trust, or one supplier buys up other suppliers where you don't see undue market power. So you can have a situation where you make sure they remain decentralized, that you make sure that there's plenty of competition. And if you can maintain plenty of competition, markets should result in efficiency. So we might want to do some intervening, allow markets to remain at the center or the core of this model, but intervene. Next, how is it going to be produced? I have to say, this definitely has, more of a negative side, connotation, or this is where a lot of the people who have problems with markets, where they point, right? How is it going to be produced? And you can see I've already put the word regulation. And here's the reason. When we say how's it going to be produced, this might lead to environmental problems. This might lead to problems with labor standards or safety standards of the product itself. So again, this might be another reason we might want to intervene in markets. And we can intervene on all of those accounts, right? We can intervene on the environmental side. There's a lot of different ways that we can do that. Okay, we can intervene and make sure that the labor standards are where we want them as a society. And we can intervene with some types of safety protocols for the products, okay? So we can still keep that market at the base, but regulate those markets, okay? To make sure that, again, products are safe, that labor standards are where we want them to be, and that we're not causing undue environmental degradation. Next, how much will be produced? Markets do this okay, but there's going to be situations that when they're acting in their private interest, right, the supplier, and then I'm pointing at the P right now, the supplier's acting in his private interest, demanders is acting in their private interest, we might get a result that we get an over-allocation of resources to the production of the good or an under-allocation of resources to production of the good. So this would be another reason we might intervene. Again, we don't have this binary system. It's not black or white. There's lots of shades of gray here. We could come in and put in a per unit tax, okay? And if we allocate a per unit tax, that's going to reduce the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. They're both going to reduce. Or we could provide a per unit subsidy to get an increase in the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded of the good. So again, this might be a reason we want to intervene in those markets. And then finally, who is going to get it? This, I have to say, may be the biggest issue of all when it comes to markets, because this demand curve is not just based on the willingness of a buyer to buy something, it's also based on their ability to pay, okay? And we know that's a big issue when it comes to necessities out there. Many of us worry, hey, when it comes to the distributional question of so many goods and services, are the ones who are economically impoverished going to get the amount that they should get of the needs that, of their basic needs? So this one definitely has issues too. But we can also do other things in society, such as progressive income taxes or social safety nets or other types of transfers where we can make the distribution of income a little bit more equitable so that when it comes to the ability to pay, people have the ability to buy those basic necessities. So here's the deal. Markets, they've got pros and they've got cons. I just want to go through our basic economic questions, okay, right here, and we can see as we go through them, oh, I see why we might want markets at the foundation, but oh, I can understand why people want intervention in those markets. But before we're done, when I talk about a market-based economy, it's basically economies where so many of the goods and services we're using market mechanisms, maybe with intervention in all kinds of ways, but we're using basic market mechanisms to decide these questions. But usually, it's not for all goods in society, right? Even in like the United States, which is very much a market-based economy, we don't do national security with markets, right? We don't use markets as our tool for deciding these questions when it comes to national security or even public safety, our police force. Also not a market-based decision. When it comes to K through 12 education, we're generally not market-based. We have some private education for K through 12, and which is market-based to some degree, but we also allow for a lot of public sector decisions there in central planning when it comes to education. Other economies outside the United States might not use markets hardly at all for their healthcare system. But again, when it comes to things like everything that's in your grocery store, a Target, a Walmart, your car parts store, Best Buy, the appliances out there, whatever, so many of the goods and services that we buy, we do have markets as the foundation. But we don't have to leave markets completely alone. We can intervene in markets. So it's really a very complex decision-making process of market-based economies, of where we're going to use markets as the foundation, and then how much are we going to intervene and tinker with the markets to give us a result that from a democratic processes standpoint that we as a society are okay with. So anyhow, that's the beginning of our exploration of markets. Just want to give you a big picture view of markets, this tool for answering some of our basic economic questions. Hope that made some sense to you, and I hope that I can see in some other videos as we explore markets a little bit further and how we can intervene in those markets to kind of maybe get some answers to these questions that we feel are more palatable from a democratic standpoint. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.